Welcome back. Alright, in this section we're going to talk about creating pull-based influence through the use of story-based marketing, and we're going to talk about the essentials of using stories in our marketing. So we talked earlier about this idea of push versus pull. Okay, in traditional push marketing, we're going to broadcast, we're going to talk louder, as you can see here with this guy. It's like we've got our megaphone and we keep turning the volume up louder and louder and louder, pushing harder, forcing you to listen. And the louder we turn up the volume, the louder we talk, the harder we push, the more assertive we become with our marketing, the more it turns people off, the more they filter, the more they resist the message, and the more expensive it becomes for us. Okay, that's what's still being done in the marketplace far, far too much. Versus, we see on the right, the lady with her kid laying there behind her, just sitting there appreciating the art. She's interested in the art. She's interested in what it says. So the pull method is to be interesting and to be more respectful with our prospects, gain their permission and build their interest and create genuine desire more naturally for them to consume our marketing message and learn about us and our product, and to create positive associations and to make their own decisions about what it is they're going to do, versus the guy on the left where we've been coerced and we've been pushed and we're ready to do anything to turn off that loud noise that's given us a headache, okay, called broadcast marketing. Instead, pull marketing, or this story-based communications approach, this finesse approach, gains people's natural interest and sucks them right in, and they're hours before they even realize what's happened to them. Okay, it's that powerful. Now, obviously, these are two very extremes I'm showing here to make the point. There are combinations that we can use stories in broadcast and regular advertising effectively, and obviously, we're going to want to turn up the volume on some level in order to get people to notice us and opt in the first place. But I hopefully made my point here that we're talking about pull-based communications with story-based marketing for the most part, not push-based. And we all understand push-based enough. I'm not going to belabor it any further. So the premise here is people will naturally move away from pain, noise, things that they don't like, and towards pleasure or things that are interesting to them. Okay, this is one of the fundamental things that Tony Robbins talked about when he said that it was interesting. One of in the personal power course, one of the few things I can remember from that far back in the course is he says people will do more to avoid pain than they will to gain pleasure. That's interesting, isn't it? Pain is 10 times more motivating, or maybe 3 times more, depending on what kind of pain it is, than pleasure. So if we can use painful stories, they're very effective at causing people to move away from or want to distance themselves from those painful kinds of stories and move towards the pleasurable stories and the nice sunset place on the beach or whatever we see on the right. Very basic concept, but it's very powerful. And when you think of stories and associations and anchoring, making sure you understand what pains are that your customers are experiencing, what they're going through, pushing those pain buttons and very quickly turning around and showing, oh, and by the way, here's this pleasure over here that you could be making use of and that you could gain. And if you don't, you're going to be stuck with that pain. We just reinforce it, but in a gentle enough way that we don't turn them off to our message. So targeted storytelling is what we will use as, I think of it as our magic carpet. We're going to take this prospect on our magic carpet ride vis-a-vis the story and move them away from the pains in their life and towards the pleasure that they seek. So stories power this metaphorical magic carpet ride that we're going to take our prospects and customers on through a combination of storytelling. Well, what powers the stories really are the different sensory modes that we talked about earlier. The blogs, the videos that are posted on our blogs, the images, the comments back from people on the blogs, the emails we send, the teleconferences we hold, the webinars we have, the videos that we produce and that customers see. Okay, all these things stimulate different parts of the brain and cause different, neurons to fire, cause different associative memories to be dredged up, and maps to be made and linkages to be created, all like what we talked about earlier. Well, stories are what power the whole thing. And the tools of the trade here, multiple sensory modes will build better maps, okay? Combinations of hitting people with pictures, images, video, and words in print, as well as voice and conversations between people and audio, teleconferences, etc. Okay, so people primarily are going to learn through. They're going to learn. Different people learn differently, and the reason they learn differently is they have different databases, if you will, in their mind of these mind maps. And some were built on sound, some were built on images, and some people are really good readers. Other people aren't very good at reading. And so the aperture into their mind, if they're not a good reader, is probably not that great through a bunch of words in an email. On the other hand, if you show that person a video, chances are they'll probably get it, because there's both pictures and words coming in audio, that they are very competent, and that there's a broad aperture, to create the level of bandwidth that you need to get your marketing message through. That makes sense? So be sure to include multiple sensory modes. Don't just communicate with your market in one way, or you'll be leaving a hell of a lot of money on the table. You need to use multiple sensory modes, even if it says the same thing. You may have noticed on the landing page, if you go to precisionmarketingsystem.com, it'll redirect you to concentric.com/precision, where you will see our landing page. There's a video there that is almost word for word the text that is below the video. Why is that? Well, because I wanted to make sure that we used multiple sensory modes. Some people either wouldn't have a speaker, or would want to be at work, maybe didn't want to disturb their neighbor, or whatever the reasons, didn't want to hear the sound, and they might stop the video. Instead, they can choose to read the page. Well, 80% of the people probably will watch the video because it's easier. And so, we want to make it easy for people to consume our marketing message and information in multiple ways. By the way, some people will watch the video and they'll read the page, and then they'll have it. I will have been, successful at creating my mind maps in the minds of these prospects in multiple modes. So videos and podcasts are a great way to use as venues to tell your compelling stories. Blogs are another great way to have not just the one-way conversation where you publish the story, but actually have people commenting on it, and which creates peer-to-peer conversations, which in effect turns into social proof that you're an authority, that what you're talking about matters, that people are paying attention, they're participating, etc. So this two-way conversations is very, very powerful. Webinars and teleconferences obviously is a great way to reach a lot more people, but having high-profile speakers and experts that you can link to and associate with your product or with the topic that ultimately is leading them towards pitch on your product is a great way to go. And we see this being done commonly. I'm not saying that everything I'm talking to you about here is brand new. I'm just trying to recap the things that you should be doing. Providing sneak peeks of your product and spy photos and interviews with the developers, interviews with the engineers, interviews behind the scenes. These are all things that are really interesting to people in your marketplace that will gain their interest and keep their interest until your product's ready to release, if it's a new product. Demonstrations. It's so easy to record demos with Camtasia or any number of tools these days. And so these things are very, very easy to do, but sometimes I just don't see that we're doing quite enough of it, and there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of latent value laying around that we could capture. Ultimately, our objective is to create decision-making momentum in the affirmative within the minds of our prospects. Okay, our goal is to enable and empower our prospect or reader to reach conclusions on their own. Okay, our readers are smart. They're smart just like you and I, and they can reason for themselves and rationalize for themselves and make their own decision when the facts or the story is framed up in a way that they can easily evaluate it within the framework of context that the story gives them. And these stories will create strong maps in the mind and enable the prospects to make their own decision internally and move from an inactive or inert state to an active or state where they're more likely to buy. Okay? And the stories make all this possible. We're going to talk about exactly how to do this too. So why are stories really so effective? Well, I found a couple quotes I thought were really interesting. One by Annette Simmons, who has a couple of really good books that are recommended reading. We'll talk more about. People are afloat in an ocean of data and disconnected facts that overwhelm them with choices today. And in this ocean of choice, a meaningful story can feel like a life preserver that tethers us to something safe, important, or more solid than those voices begging for our attention, those advertisements. I just thought that was a very interesting quote that Annette made there. Another one that's also interesting is storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. So you can use stories to convey the meaning and do our map building without committing the error of confronting the user and trying to teach them about our product. If you try to tell me about your product, you're probably going to turn me off. But if you embed your product in an interesting story, I'll suck that right up. And I'll ask for more because it's interesting. And that's what we want to spend our time on, is things that are interesting. So the way this works, I'm going to use an existing model that's well understood called the AIDA. It stands for attention or awareness, interest, desire or decision, and action. And I use a little different words because some people use different words. I think of it in terms of attention. We've got to get your attention first. We have to create interest in what we're talking about, and we have to present it to you in a way that's interesting. And the way we do that is, by the way, how do you become interesting to somebody? You talk about what they are interested in. So you have to understand your audience and not talk about what you're interested in, but talk about what they are interested in. Okay? It's one of the keys to keeping the conversation going is in being interesting, is to be interested in what the other person wants to know or wants to talk about. And then we need to build interest and desire and desire for learning more, knowing more, and then ultimately into taking action, making a decision and taking action to get our product, okay, or to sign up with us, or to use us, use our services, or whatever the action is for you in your business. So why stories work? Well, from an attention perspective, they get people's attention and they heighten their awareness. And a good story can really pull a reader in and retain their attention. And importantly, it opens the mind for the map work that needs to take place. Okay, and it does the map building in a way that is not objectionable to the reader. And they get past this; these stories get past people's various filtration systems, and they don't look like ads or selling. It doesn't set off the sort of selling radar. I don't know about you, but when I see an ad, I immediately, there's a kind of I think of it as a buying force field that comes up. And when I see an advertisement or somebody approaching me that looks like a salesperson, my sales resistance radar picks up on it, and that radar picks up, goes whoop, 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 yep, kind of beeps at you. Well, mine does anyway. And and then the force fields come up. Okay, now it's 10 times harder to sell me. So the stories don't set off those radars, and they don't cause those force fields to come up and prevent our marketing message from getting through and our selling activity from getting through. That's the key. You got to get in there, okay, and you can't bounce off. And if you raise the prospects, cause the prospects to raise their radar, or cause their radar to detect that this is an advertising you're about to be sold, then you're probably going to get filtered out. So stories also engage our readers on a more subjective level. So it's not just give me the facts, ma'am, in Sergeant Friday mode. It's talking about something that's interesting. A lot of these stories have a human component to them. There's an emotional component. It's just interesting, and it engages people on a more complete subjective level. And then stories can be used to rapidly build and update those maps that are so critically important to enabling our prospects to make those implicit internalized decisions on our behalf. So it enables our messaging to get past the reader's natural sales resistance and create some internal desire, momentum within our prospects. They also capture and frame the reader's interest. So this frame that we talked about is very important, because what's in the frame are the things that is the way the story is going to get evaluated, okay? And if I feel like I'm being sold, I'm evaluating every bit of information one way. If I'm reading an interesting story, I'm probably a lot more open, and I'm just reading things through. I'm not filtering it the same way. I'm not constantly asking myself the question, do I believe that? Are they trying to convince me? Are they lying? Are they, because I know they're trying to sell me something, right? People evaluate things differently. So when we set the frame around an interesting story, all those filters, not all the filters, but many of the filters get turned off. And so we don't get the usual filtration systems and belief systems rejecting what we're saying. They also generate an emotional connection within the mind of the reader, and can also reset the state of mind temporarily. That's a biggie. Why do you suppose we like to watch movies? Horror movies, science fiction movies, love stories. Because it resets our state of mind, and it takes the mind to a different place than where we really are. That's what stories do. We take people where they want to go. And it provides a less confrontational context for this marketing map building that we really need to do. And so the frame, it also filters out unwanted noise from our map building process. What does that mean? Well, I believe that if you're in a selling mode, there's all kinds of filters, there's all kinds of noise, I should say, that's coming from other areas of the mind that's entering into the kind of conversation that's going on inside this prospect's mind as they're evaluating what they're learning about. On the other hand, if there's an interesting story going on, the user gets so absorbed in the story that these other unwanted noises don't interfere with our map building, and they don't pollute the map that's built. And so we get a much more pristine and proper map that's built to our liking, and that's going to enable us to have a more positive impact on our prospect. Now, stories are also very powerful and persuasive because they can illustrate or be used by example to help people understand situations that are relevant directly to them, and hopefully relate to the reader's own situation if you've chosen the story material correctly. They also provide a context for the user to comprehend and understand and internalize and do their map building in a potentially complex kind of situation. And they allow the reader to actually experience the feelings and emotions associated with the character in the story, and for you to do anchoring effectively. Okay, to anchor to these emotions and to stimulate those emotions, associate them with your product. I mean, this is powerful stuff, folks. You stimulate the internal desires to achieve the same results that the story depicts. So at the end, after the story, it's like they come away with this desire of, wow, I want that. I want to feel like that. I want to have those kind of results. And it's just the way they feel at that point, okay? Because they experienced the story firsthand. And then ultimately enables the readers to reach their own conclusions and take action. They don't feel like they were pushed or suckered into taking action by a sales guy that twisted their arm. They weren't coerced. They were simply given the information that they needed to make their own decision. Stories also provide direct social proof, since it actually happened to somebody. Gosh, this is proof that this is real. Okay, especially if I hear somebody else telling their own story, then it's very, very powerful. So the reader actually sees the real world connections between your product and the results that they seek. Many times the user's maps won't allow them, their map of the real world will not allow them to see the connection between your product and the results that they actually seek. The stories enable them to make those connections by reading about or learning about someone else who has made those connections. And of course, the downside of this potentially can be that the reader now expects the exact same results illustrated by the story, which may or may not be possible. So, there's always a yin and a yang in everything, right? All right, let's move on to another discussion about stories. The stories have been around, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner here, for a very long time. And, even before we had language as humans, we were writing as best we could on cave walls and using pictures and images, which are very powerful, to convey the things that were going on and try to tell the stories as best we could. So human beings are wired to be storytellers. We've been telling stories for as long as we've been around. And these stories are easily remembered, often in very vivid detail. Stories are often repeated by word of mouth, sometimes more accurately than others, as we know. But simple stories are the easiest to repeat with the highest fidelity. So consider the complexity level of the story. Make sure you emphasize and bring out the parts of the story that you want to have repeated, the key points of the story. Now, another thing is controversial stories, and I call them wow factor stories, will get repeated much more virally because they have much bigger emotional impact on people, and people like talking about stuff that's controversial. So I'll tell you, a little story of my own here. I have a little niche business in the poker training space where we teach people how to become better poker players. Well, a lot of people who play online poker think the poker rooms are cheating them. Well, guess what? They have no evidence that the poker rooms cheat, but they just believe that maybe they do because they're losing, therefore somebody must be cheating, because it couldn't be them that's at fault for making bad decisions, right? So I published this story in my blog called The Dale Story. And the Dale story, long story short, so to speak, was about a player who thought the poker rooms was cheating. He was about ready to quit poker. He'd given up. He was going to give up on all of it because he just felt like everybody was cheating, and no matter what he did, he couldn't win. And published this Dale story. And in fact, what happened? Dale got help from our club. He got in touch with in the forums with one of our coaches who helped him out, gave him a plan to some things to try, and he watched some of the videos on the training site. And within a matter of weeks, kaboom, Dale was suddenly winning. He wasn't complaining about the poker rooms cheating anymore. And suddenly he was actually doing really well. And so what happened was this controversy of are the poker rooms cheating you is something that was rolling around in almost everybody's mind. They're wondering, can I trust these poker rooms? They must be cheating. I wonder if they're cheating. Well, as soon as that topic came up, everybody had to read about the story, and everybody had an opinion. I'm telling you, my blog went nuts. I've hardly ever had anybody commenting on my blog until I published that story, and I'll bet you there's probably 10 pages of comments against this one or two posts on this Dale story, okay? Because it was a controversial story. People love controversy, so if you can find the right controversies and you can find the storylines around those controversies in a way that doesn't make you or your company look bad, obviously you don't want to anchor to something negative, but find some controversy and latch onto it because it gets talked about and it gets repeated and it'll move virally throughout the blogosphere if you're into blogging, which you should be. So the web enables this global storytelling. So as you see here with the two faces digitally looking at each other, we're way past the cave walls, obviously. I mean, you can publish a story on the web and millions of people have access to it almost instantly. At least your audience that you bring to read the story, bring to their attention or that find it, have instant access. It's an amazing time to do global storytelling that has an incredible reach, with the push of a few buttons. We've come a very, very long way. And so this word of mouth aspect of stories and the legends that can be created from these stories are really powerful. So what kinds of stories can we use? Well, If my good friend and associate Jeff Selma were here, I would let him take you through this section, but since he's not, I'm going to go ahead and get started here and take you through each of these myself. So there are many different kinds of stories, but we picked some here that I think are the most important, and we're going to go into a lot more depth on the first two, the redemption tale and the values and action story. There are also other stories like the creation story, which is talked a lot in a book called Primal Branding that I really highly recommend. And the creation story basically talks about how we came to be. People are interested in how your company got started. They're interested in how that product came to be that you're selling. They're interested in anything having to do with creation of companies, people, products. They want to know how things got to be the way that they are. They're just interested in it. There are other kinds of stories that Annette talks about in Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins, like Who Am I stories. So that answer the question, who am I? Why am I here? Well, I am here to serve you, or we are here because we are experts in whatever topic. In our case, it's precision marketing. There are teaching stories, stories that teach by example. There are vision stories. Here's our vision. Here's a story about the future and the vision we have of how life will be in the future. So you have visionary type stories. And then there's I know what you're thinking kinds of stories. So I know you must be thinking about how this product could be used in this particular situation that you have. I know you must be thinking, I'm just trying to sell you something. Well, you know what? It's true. I am actually trying to sell you something, but the reason I'm trying to sell you something is because you need it, and this is going to help you, and here's why, and here's a story about how it's going to help you. But I know what you're thinking, and I can identify with you. I'm a lot like you, and we're a lot alike. There's all kinds of ways and angles you can use here that are extremely powerful, and the deeper, like I said, you go into this storytelling, the more opportunity. You're just going to be amazed at how much opportunity there actually is sitting here available to you to take advantage of. All right, so let's move on now to the redemption tale and then values and action. So in a redemption tale, we basically have a character who is at the beginning of a story, and then we have a character arc where this character goes through this transition of being kind of in a normal state, and then some kind of conflict happens, and then the bulk of the story, the middle of the story, is all about the conflict and the journey, and how this conflict ultimately gets resolved. This is 95% of all movies and shows that you see on TV are this format. There's a beginning where we set up the characters and the environment, the events, what's happening. Then there's the middle where the conflict takes place. The character goes through the character arc throughout the middle, which is the bulk of the story. And then there's an ending. Okay, there's how this all gets resolved, and then how things turn out at the end. And that's it. That's how 95% of everything is done in Hollywood. Now you know the secret to it. And I discovered this from my good friend, associate Jeff Selma, who is both a screenwriter and a very accomplished copywriter and marketer, who has written a number of screenplays and basically taught me about this. But so when we think about these stories, there's a beginning where there's some kind of conflict and turmoil that we find ourselves in. We come along through the story, and somewhere the character or the story runs into your company and your product. They discover your product. And your product is the catalyst for conflict resolution, amazingly enough. So the story all of a sudden starts unfolding differently because of your product being involved with this prospect, this case study. This, what used to be a dry case study, is suddenly an interesting story. And then, of course, there's an ending, and there's all the emotions associated with how the person felt, the character felt before and the beginning, and then during the middle, how they felt when they found your product, and wow, how it felt to solve the problem, and how it feels now that everything's better because of your product. Wow, I want to buy your product. I don't even know what it is. Well, that's what the power of story can do with you and your marketing. So The key is we want to show the successful outcome that the character is going through because of or involving your product. Your product's the enabler, the catalyst for the successful outcome, getting them out of those rough seas and into the good place that they want to be.